Well, if two separate things. I mean, if you're talking about the attacks on the Kurds, now the Iranian, and I didn't mention this earlier, the Iranians are doing two things. They're attacking the Kurdish areas of Iran, right, like Mahabad, the traditional Kurdish majority areas of Iran, in a way because of the domestic uprising and because, Hama or Jian Amini was the first woman who died because of whose death essentially started all these demonstrations, was Kurdish, right? And it's in the Kurdish areas that there was this very severe reaction to her death. And the more they've attacked the Kurdish areas, the more the reaction has intensified in Kurdistan. But they're also attacking Iranian Kurdish positions in northern Iraq. Right? So the Iranians are doing two things. And then the Turks are attacking Syrian Kurds and also attacking Kurds in Iraq. But in some ways, they're different in terms of international reaction. Let's face it, there's very little anybody can do about Iranian attacks. Iran doesn't listen to anybody. Iran is isolated. It has already, the rest of the world has imposed amazing sanctions on Iran. And what else are you going to do to Iran, right? The Russians today need Iran because we see that they're buying all these drones that they use in Ukraine from Iran. They have essentially established fairly close relationship with Iran. So Russia is not going to say anything. The West is not doing anything. The Arab world is not doing anything, in part because there's not much you can do. I mean, think of Abu Dhabi, where you are, or Saudi. If they were to say something about what's happening in Iran, the Iranians are not going to listen to those countries, right? They have no influence. Turkish attacks, on Syria is different because Turkey is integrated into the West. Turkish trade is with the West, and the Turks need the West more than the West needs Turkey. I'm not saying that the West doesn't need Turkey, but and the United States on its own, not Europeans, the United States on its own has a great deal of leverage on Turkey, whether it is arms sales or it is financial investments. So there is a way in which President Biden could, if he wanted to, really say something to the Turks and prevent them. But he's not doing it. Why? I mean, I think there's a division within the American government as to what to do. There are parts of the American government that would like to take a stronger action against the Turks, and there are parts that that doesn't want to. It says, "Oh, Turkey is too important." This debate in the American government and in American decision-making circles, even outside the government, on Turkey has been going on for decades.
اعذرني على المقاطعة، حتى مع نتائج انتخابات التجديد النصفي لن يتغير أي شيء؟
We haven't seen how things are going to work out. The reason I say this is because the Republicans, who are now going to control the House, are divided on this issue. There are some Republicans who are a little bit more pro-Turkish. It's not that they're pro-Turkish, they're pro-Erdogan maybe. If you remember, Trump himself was very sympathetic to Erdogan, like he was sympathetic to just about every dictator in the world. But he liked Erdogan. Except for one incident where he put the squeeze on Erdogan, he basically allowed Erdogan to do anything he wanted, and he pulled American troops out of parts of Syria where the Turks took over. But there's also among the Republicans a very strong anti-Turkish or anti-Erdogan position because of what Erdogan did with the S-400s, what he's doing with the Syrian Kurds now. You have to remember that in some ways, Republicans are more upset or worried about the Islamic State than they are about other issues. So if you're undermining the fight against the Islamic State, then you're undermining the American position. And I think the Turks are playing a little bit with fire. It's very interesting what you also implied, because before the midterm elections. I saw an interview with Erdogan in which he said he basically was wishing that the Republicans win both the Senate and the House, because he said we get along better with the Republicans. So he wanted the Republicans to get the Senate. The Republicans are not going to get the Senate. But the House is so narrowly controlled by the Republicans that it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to come up with a consensus. So the Biden administration, in some ways, has more autonomy to decide its policies. And we'll see what happens. But look, the Republicans have not yet taken over. They are very divided about domestic issues at the moment, and that's what they're focusing on. So they haven't focused on foreign policy yet. But the leading Republicans on foreign policy have been very critical of Turkey and Turkish policy in Syria, and the S-400 missile case. So we'll see. I mean, the Turks are, as I said, they're taking a risk here, but I think Erdogan is calculating that in the short term, and remember, his goal is the elections, right? That in the short term, and the elections have to take place before May of 2023, for Erdogan, the issue is short term. He has to have elections before May 2023, right? So he's calculating that between now and when the elections take place, and especially if the elections are early, that there's very little the United States can do to damage his prospects, right? And what he does in Syria, of course, is also very popular with the Turkish public. The Turkish public has bought this fiction that it was the Syrian Kurds who did the bombing in Istanbul, right? You look at the Turkish press, they're all 100% pushing this, with the exception of a few voices, saying, oh, yes, the Syrian Kurds did it. Well, there is no evidence, I mean, no real evidence for that. So Erdogan is calculating, look, all I have to do is the next 6 to 7 months I have to survive and make the most out of it. And so that's what he's doing. So he's assuming that the Americans won't be able to do anything significant in that short period of time.